So what happened to Democrat Andrew Yang? It was a year ago when he fell short in the Democratic presidential nomination, losing, of course, to Joe Biden and falling behind Bernie Sanders, even though Yang had this fascinating proposal for a universal basic income. And then out of the ashes of that campaign, he decided to run for New York City mayor. He was the favorite early on and then faded. Not even finishing in the top two. Here to talk about what happened is Varun Nakor. He is the president of the Asian American Pacific Islander Victory Fund. It is a political action committee which backed Andrew Yang's mayoral campaign. Varun, what happened to Andrew Yang?
Well, the most obvious is he didn't have enough votes. And I mean, sort of what that translates into is in terms of New York City politics is he didn't have the coalitions that he needed and just wasn't able to come out ahead. I think there's many sort of, layers of the onion we can peel back, but I think to kind of get to the heart of it, frankly, he wasn't able to sort of have this propelling moment that really caused all corners of the city, or at least key voting blocks and coalitions to support him.
Were there any self-inflicted errors that maybe proved to be fatal? And I'm thinking, for example, I mean, he said that, look, I had an apartment in New York City when the pandemic hit. I got my family out of there. A lot of New Yorkers took offense to that, saying, no, he should have been tough as a New Yorker and stayed there. It seemed like that was pretty devastating to him.
There were several self-inflicted wounds, certainly, and I think it caused concern of some, not only AAPI voters, Asian American voters, but all voters around the New York City area, and of course his one sort of blunder about supporting the Israelis right before the conflict in Palestine, and I think that seemed like very blatant pandering to some. And so I think in the end, there was sort of a common thread of lack of consistency, not only in terms of his core messaging and in terms of how he wanted to portray himself, but there was these blunders that I think in the end made some folks sort of wonder whether he was the right leader for the job at this present time.
Now, never mind the blunders, the inability to sort of stitch together the unique coalition you need to be successful in New York. There were some intriguing things about this campaign simply because he seemed to be labeled by the media to a certain extent as the foreigner in the race. What did you make of that?
Yeah, it was very concerning watching this from the outside. I'm in just outside of DC, and I mean, it was really tough at this time as an Asian American candidate to run in a city where you had some of the highest acts of violence against Asian Americans, and then you had mainstream news articles and cartoons, frankly, that were calling him this foreigner, using tropes that have been used against Asian Americans over several decades, since the late 1800s, in fact. And I think that the sort of the insult to injury was, this one cartoon showing getting out of a subway stop in Times Square when, as sort of like, a person who says when asked, what is your favorite spot in the city, it says Times Square, and he chose that because he responded that Times Square was his favorite part of the city because that's the subway stop that he came in and out of work on a daily basis, right? So it just showed that there was this subtext of microaggressions / racism against him that might not land on other candidates in the same way. But when you use these sort of subtle tropes against Asian candidates, very, very concerning. It makes the job much harder to even want to run for office.
Did you see these tropes across the mainstream media, or were there particular publications? And I'm thinking maybe some of the, the New York Post and some of the more conservative publications that were covering the race. It was primarily that of the New York Post, and then I think there was towards the late end of the campaign, a candidate who essentially said that he was trying to drive the people of color out of the race. And I mean, what is in fact Andrew Yang but a second generation Asian American? So I think that there were certain instances of this, and I think his wife had to come
come out and sort of, make a statement, because he got tired of having that take him off message. So I think, there was a lot of these instances that were cause of concern, and just makes the job doubly hard as an Asian American candidate at this time when nerves are very frayed across the country.
Did you see some news organizations, though, that did perhaps a more responsible job in covering Andrew Yang and covering the campaign simply based on, again, the coalitions and the policies, and not necessarily based on the ethnicity?
Yeah, I think that, overall, the mainstream news outlets, I mean, it's tough, right? I mean, New York City's it's got to be one of the toughest places to run for any office, just because of the backbiting nature and sort of the viciousness of politics that comes to the surface. But for the most part, I think, they were predominantly fair.
What do you see being the future for Andrew Yang? He's talked about, since his loss in the New York mayoral race, of wanting to contribute and serve in some capacity in New York City. What sort of role do you envision for him that would both be helpful to the city, but also to the people who supported him, not only in the mayoral run, but also in his presidential campaign?
I think he definitely has a future, and he has a future because he has a following. And there were a lot of supporters, donors who were captivated by his vision, frankly, for not only changing New York City, but when he was running for president, how he wanted to speak to many things that a lot of candidates didn't speak to. So I think he definitely has a future, and I think he's making those plans. And we look forward to hearing more and seeing more from Andrew Yang.
Are you very optimistic that we'll get to a point when an Asian American presidential candidate or politician seeking the office of mayor of New York City can be defined really not by what they look like or their ethnicity or their family background, but simply more based on their policies?
I strongly believe that we will see that day, hopefully sooner than later. We all have high hopes for Kamala Harris, and certainly there are great folks running for mayor in this, Asian Americans who are running in the city of Boston, Michelle Wu, and in Cincinnati, Aftab Purival. So we're very excited about the future. This is the first time we believe that there are this many Asian candidates running for big, mayors in big towns, and that could propel others to see a pathway to politics other than what might be considered typical, like running for city council or state legislature or even federal office, which I think a lot of folks gravitate to. So these mayor's races in Cincinnati and Boston are something that we're keeping a very close eye on.
I'll never forget when Joe Lieberman was selected by Vice President Gore in 2000 to be his running mate. There were many Jewish Americans who, while proud of Joe Lieberman and having somebody like him on the ticket, they were also nervous because they thought, oh my goodness, this might bring out more anti-Semitism, and maybe Joe Lieberman's life is going to be in danger, and it elevates this issue. Are there some of the same anxieties in the Asian American community as political candidates with that background take on a higher prominence?
That is always a concern, I would say, for any disadvantaged group or underrepresented group when they first make this run for office. I worked on the Al Gore campaign, and I was there in the office when Joe Lieberman walked by, and at the time he was an inspiration to many. A lot of folks were motivated to see him run at the time. That being said, when you do have these candidates who are breaking new ground in this respect, there is that nervousness. When Joe Kennedy was running for office, there was this concern that, hey, this could be the first Catholic. What would this mean in terms of the viciousness of the race? And there was that concern even way back then.
Do you see much racism to this day among most mainstream voters towards Asian American candidates in the same way that a lot of people say there's still racism and anti-Semitism to other candidates?
I think it's just situational in most respects. I'm not sure I would paint it with a broad brush and say, all candidates who run face this. I think it's on the margins. Yes, occasionally it happens. There's certain areas where we're keeping an eye on, across the country that are potential early warning indicators. But we, overall, I think it's a hospitable landscape for Asian Americans to run for office. Since Donald Trump got elected in 2016, it drove out obviously many women to run for office, and a lot of people of color, and specifically Asian Americans. And so I think the future is bright, and we shouldn't let the fear of this potential, these potential acts kind of keep anybody away from serving in public office.
I agree with you. I do think there is a silver lining to the Trump era. Maybe it is that it's causing a lot of people to be more engaged in politics, more civically minded than before, because in part, so many of us are afraid of what the Donald Trump era is bringing. But in any case, Varun Nikor, he's the president of the AAPI Victory Fund. And Varun, good of you to join us today. Thanks so much for doing this.
My pleasure, David. Thank you.
You got it. And that will do it for our show on this day. On behalf of Asher Cofield and the rest of the gang at the Young Turks and at The Conversation, I'm David Shuster. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.